History Talk with Smith Co. Hello and welcome back to History Talk, or if you're new here, welcome to History Talk. So today we're talking about the response of nationalists to the idea of partition. So Unionist resistance to Home Rule worried many sort of liberals. So, in 1912, for example, Lloyd George and Churchill had suggested that each counties in Ulster be allowed to vote on whether it wanted Home Rule or whether it would prefer to remain in the United Kingdom for a few more years. The idea was called county option. Redmond, however, turned it down. Like many nationalists, he hated the idea of partition. He had a speech in which he said, "Ireland is worse in one entity. There is one land. Our ideal in this moment is a self-governing Ireland. In the future, where all her sons and all races and creeds within her shores will bring their tribute, great or small, to the great total of national enterprise, national statesmanship, and national happiness." But by the autumn of 1913, the Liberals made it very clear that he had to choose, either agree to partition or give up the idea of Home Rule. As a result, secret talks between Carson and Redmond began in 1913 and continued into the summer of 1914. Now, the two sides soon accepted that there was only one way to avoid a civil war, and that was to exclude Ulster from Home Rule. But this comes along three very important questions. What exactly is meant by Ulster? What was to happen if you think about it the excluded area? And how long would this exclusion last? You see, Ulster was, as a province thing, it contained 9 counties. And in the 1911 census, it showed that Ulster Protestants outnumbered Ulster Catholics by 891,000 to 691,000. And the map showed 2 communities were not spread evenly over the 9 counties. For example, 4 counties, Antrim, Down, Armagh and Derry, had a clear Protestant Unionist majority. But parts of those counties, such as Derry City, South Armagh and South Down, had local nationalist majorities. 3 counties, such as Donegal, Cavan and Monaghan, had very large Catholic nationalist majorities. Now, 2 counties, Tyrone and Fermanagh, were mostly evenly divided, though Catholics were in a small majority. Now, then comes the question of what was to happen to the excluded area. Redmond offered Carson Home Rule within Home Rule. This was a separate Belfast Parliament under the overall control over the Dublin Parliament. The Unionists, of course, turned that down. They wanted to remain under the direct rule of the Westminster Parliament. By 1914, this seemed like the most likely solution. Then there came the most important question was, how long would this exclusion last? Redmond offered to accept the transition period of 6 years. Carson rejected this. He wanted a permanent exclusion. By 1914, it seemed that they would not put any time on the exclusion. This suited both party leaders. Redmond could claim that it was a temporary arrangement, while Carson could claim that it was actually a permanent arrangement. Now, at the start, these were secret talks, so, people didn't know about them. But then, word about these secret talks leaks out. Up to then, most nationalists hadn't actually taken, much, idea of Unionist resistance in a serious manner. They believed that Carson and Craig were bluffing, and that they mocked the UVF when at first they drilled with wooden guns. So it was actually a sudden shock to them to sort of see this kind of, acceptance of a possible partition. So when they hear about Redmond talking about partition, there's a general feeling that something should be done about it, but no one was sure what it was that actually they should do. Obviously, this plays in the hands of the Republicanism groups such as the IRB. Now, the IRB are, at this time, they have almost disappeared. But following the decade, a small group of dedicated revolutionaries had been working to revive it. So, two of them were Bulmer Hobson and Sean McDermott. They were inspired by the cultural revival they at first then supported Arthur Griffin Sinn Féin, but then they grew disillusioned with his attitude to physical force, because obviously he didn't want to use physical force, he wanted to use politics. Now, in 1907, an old Republican, Tom Clark, returned to Ireland. To the younger men, he was a hero because he'd spent 15 years in an English jail for setting off bombs in Britain. He was on the IRB Supreme Council, and with his help, they took it over in 1912. Now, they then began to recruit young men. Some who joined them were more drawn to the republicanism by the cultural revival. However, others, by Redmond's acceptance of partition, were, well, they felt that, well, this was the only other option. So, one of their main sort of reasons why they would have joined would have been, of course, well, basically, it would have been the situation which you have, whereby people are, all the time, they're brought into this thing, which I think is a bad idea. It is similar, sort of, to Nazi Germany, where, like, the kind of recruits you have are sort of, some of them, like senior recruits, they're not in a position of power, but they are in a position of indoctrination. For example, the schoolmaster Project Pierce, who up to then had actually backed Redmond and Home Rule. Then in 1913, it takes the IRB oath. Now, obviously, being a schoolmaster is a dodgy thing to have in the area. So the IRB's main aim is to sort of have an armed rebellion against British rule. But where are they supposed to find these men and the guns that need to be, well, there to sort of fight the British? Now, the crisis over Home Rule gave them an answer. So, in November 1913, an article appears in the Gaelic League paper called The North Began. It was written by Owen MacNeill, one of the founders of the Gaelic League. In it, MacNeill suggested that nationalists form their own volunteers to put pressure on the British to keep their promise on Home Rule. MacNeill's article was just what the IRB had been waiting for. A body of armed nationalists would provide them with the army they needed for a rebellion against British rule. Better still, the British could not stop them since they had not stopped Carlson and the UVF. So then comes something a little bit different, because here you have the setting up of the Irish Volunteers. So Hobson approaches MacNeill and suggests he call on a meeting to discuss his idea. It was held in a concert hall in Dublin on the 25th of November 1913. Thousands turned up and agreed to set up the Irish National Volunteers. On the first night alone, over 3,000 men enrolled. They elected MacNeill as their commander and picked a provisional committee to run the movement. However, unknown to MacNeill, he was not in the IRB, the majority of the provisional committee were actually IRB men. So this will obviously cause problems later down the line. Then you have the founding of Cumann na mBan. So a number of women had actually attended the meeting. The volunteers were, quite sexist, and they did not allow them to join. So, in April 1914, they decided to found Cumann na mBan. Most of the members were wives and sisters of the volunteers. They saw themselves as fundraisers, nurses, and messengers rather than soldiers. That was a general view. However, this view did not see the more militant figures, such as Hannah Shevington or Constance Markovich, who then later became prominent in this movement. Because while you have the majority of people at this time they're there to defend the kind of system, but they're not there to sort of defend it at any cost. They're there to defend it if it's absolutely necessary. So that's the general view. But there are others who are going to be a little bit trigger happy. Now, by early March 1914, Ireland was in crisis. Two large growing private armies faced each other. The Home Rule Bill was due to pass in its last stage in September. And if nothing was done, civil war seemed very likely. The biggest threat was, of course, the UVF. By then it had 100,000 members. As yet they had very few arms, but there were rumours of plans to get more. Clearly, it was time for Asquith to act. The obvious thing was to send the British Army to disarm them. Of course, the problem is this causes an issue. And that's what we'll be talking about in the next video. Please do join us then. And if not, you can view other videos. You don't have to view history. You can view business. You can view home economics. There's lots of videos available. And hopefully, if we don't see you next time, and if you don't see other videos, then I guess we'll say bye for everything. And just hope that you enjoy the rest of your existence.